There was a woman in her late 60s who started to worry about her memory. Not because she forgot everything, but because of the small things. Names, words, simple details that used to come easily. Now, they took a moment longer. Sometimes they didn't come at all. She thought it was aging, something she couldn't control, until one day, she noticed something unexpected. The things she remembered clearly were the things she used often, and the things she forgot were the ones she had quietly stopped using. That's when she realized it wasn't her memory that was failing. It was something else. Memory is often misunderstood. Many people believe memory works like a storage box. Either information is there or it disappears. But the brain does not work that way, especially during aging. After many years working with older adults, I've seen how often people mistake reduced access for permanent loss, and those are not always the same thing. The brain is constantly adapting, strengthening what is used often, reducing efficiency for what is rarely used. This process is natural. In fact, it's part of how the brain conserves energy. Connections that are repeated regularly become stronger, faster, more accessible. Connections used less often become quieter, not erased, just less active. The woman began noticing this in small moments. One afternoon, she was sitting near the kitchen window, sunlight falling softly across the table. She reached for a word during conversation with her daughter. A simple word, one she had used many times before. But suddenly, it paused somewhere in her mind, close enough to feel, but not close enough to say immediately. That frightened her more than she admitted. Later that evening, she sat quietly in her bedroom. The room was dark except for a small bedside lamp. She leaned back against the pillow, thinking, reflecting, trying to remember other moments like that. And slowly, she realized something interesting. The memories that stayed sharp were connected to repetition. Phone numbers she used often, recipes she cooked regularly, stories she told repeatedly. But information she no longer interacted with felt distant, harder to retrieve. And this is something modern life quietly changes. People rely more on phones, search engines, reminder apps, navigation systems, external memory everywhere. Convenient, helpful. But sometimes, the brain stops practicing certain tasks because technology performs them instead. Not because the brain is incapable, but because it adapts to reduced demand. The next morning, she opened the curtains and allowed bright sunlight into the room. She stood quietly for a moment, watching dust drift through the morning air. And for the first time, instead of feeling afraid about her memory, she became curious about it. That small emotional shift mattered more than she realized, because fear often causes withdrawal, but curiosity encourages engagement, and the brain responds strongly to engagement. The woman who worried about her memory began observing her habits more carefully. Not only what she forgot, but what she no longer used. Her days had become predictable, comfortable, quiet. The same television programs, the same routines, the same conversations. Very little that challenged her thinking, very little requiring deep focus. And over time, the brain adapts to repetition too. One morning, while drinking coffee near the window, she decided to try something simple. Instead of immediately checking her phone for reminders, she attempted to remember appointments herself. At first, it felt frustrating, slow, uncertain. She doubted herself repeatedly, but she kept trying. Later that week, she visited a friend for lunch. Normally, she listened passively during conversation, but this time, she focused intentionally, remembering names, details, stories, asking questions, staying mentally present. That evening, she noticed something surprising. Her mind felt more awake, not dramatically, but active, engaged, and this is important to understand. The brain thrives on stimulation, especially meaningful stimulation, conversation, learning, movement, reflection. Even walking can support memory function. Research continues showing that physical activity improves blood flow to the brain, which supports cognitive performance. The connection between movement and thinking is stronger than many people realize. So she added small walks into her routine too. Nothing intense, just steady walking through her neighborhood during the morning, sunshine warming the sidewalks, birds moving through the trees, her thoughts becoming clearer as she moved, and gradually, she began feeling something she had not felt in a long time. Confidence. Not because her memory became perfect, but because it became more responsive again, more available, more alive. One night, while lying awake briefly after midnight, she realized something comforting. Her memory had not disappeared. Parts of it had simply become inactive from lack of use. And slowly, through repetition and attention, those pathways were waking up again. Reduced memory use can quietly create a cycle. Less use leads to weaker access. Weaker access leads to less confidence. Less confidence leads to more avoidance. And over time, people begin relying entirely on external systems. Phones for reminders, GPS for directions, search engines for basic facts. Again, these tools are not harmful, but when they completely replace mental effort, the brain receives less stimulation, and the brain adapts accordingly. The woman noticed this pattern in herself. She stopped trying to remember phone numbers, stopped practicing directions, stopped recalling details, because it felt easier to look everything up immediately. Without realizing it, she had reduced opportunities for her brain to stay engaged. One afternoon, she sat quietly in the living room, television playing softly in the background. But instead of watching, she found herself thinking deeply, reflecting on how quickly confidence changes during aging. Sometimes people become afraid of forgetting, so they stop trusting themselves altogether. And that emotional response matters, because anxiety itself interferes with memory retrieval. The more pressure people place on recall, the harder retrieval often becomes. This is especially common during stress or fatigue, and poor sleep can worsen it further. That night, she struggled briefly with insomnia, turning over beneath the blanket, staring at the dark ceiling, her mind restless. And the next morning, her focus felt noticeably weaker. That's because sleep plays a critical role in memory consolidation. During sleep, the brain organizes information, strengthens important connections, processes experiences. Without adequate sleep, recall often becomes slower and less reliable. This is why brain health is never only about memory exercises. It also involves movement, rest, social interaction, mental stimulation, emotional health. Everything works together. And fortunately, the brain remains adaptable much longer than many people assume, even later in life. Improving memory does not require complicated techniques. In many cases, it begins with simple engagement, using the brain intentionally. The woman started practicing small forms of recall during daily life, remembering grocery items before writing them down, recalling names from old photographs, trying to summarize conversations afterward. Simple exercises, but meaningful ones. She also began reading more attentively, not just scanning pages passively, but pausing, reflecting, thinking about what she had read. This kind of active engagement strengthens focus and memory together. She even introduced small changes into her routine. New walking path, new recipes, new books, different conversations. Novelty matters because the brain responds strongly to variation. New experiences encourage adaptation, and adaptation keeps neural pathways active. Some mornings, she walked through the neighborhood while mentally listing memories from earlier years. Family vacations, old friends, songs from childhood. At first, details arrived slowly, but over time, they surfaced more naturally. And something emotional happened too. Those memories no longer felt lost. They felt reachable again. That emotional reassurance was powerful, because many older adults fear memory decline silently, often more than they admit. But the brain is not fixed. It changes continuously in response to how it is used. And consistency matters far more than perfection. Small, daily engagement, repeated gently over time, can create noticeable improvement in clarity and confidence. Not overnight, but steadily. Forgetting is often treated as proof of decline, something frightening, something permanent. But memory is more nuanced than that. The brain reflects its patterns, what it repeats, what it practices, what it engages with regularly, and when memory is used actively, the brain responds, adapts, strengthens connections again. The woman eventually realized something important. Her memory problems were not entirely about aging. Some were about reduced engagement, reduced challenge, reduced use. And once she began changing those patterns, her mind responded positively. Not perfectly, but meaningfully. Her thinking felt clearer. Conversations felt easier. Names returned more naturally. Even her confidence improved. And confidence matters deeply for cognitive health. Because people who trust their mind continue using it, continue challenging it, continue engaging with life. One evening, she sat quietly beside the bedroom window, watching the final sunlight disappear from the sky. The room slowly growing darker around her, and instead of fear, she felt understanding. The brain was not demanding perfection. It was asking for participation, for use, for stimulation, for attention. And after decades spent caring for older adults, I believe this may be one of the most important truths about memory. The brain stays stronger when it continues being invited to work, to think, to remember, to reflect, to stay curious. Sometimes, the difference between feeling forgetful and feeling mentally clear begins with one simple habit: using your mind a little more every day.